Hello and welcome. You've tuned in to Arirang's Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. The Summit for Democracy, a U.S.-led initiative that aims to protect democracy and freedom worldwide, kicked off in Seoul on Monday under the tagline, Democracy for Future Generations. South Korea's hosting of the summit, the third of its kind, comes as the country attempts to position itself as a global leader in expanding democratic values and preventing the erosion of rights amid growing assaults around the world. Tonight, we take a closer look into the global event taking place right here in Seoul and its global implications. For that, we have Choi Hyun-jin, an associate professor at Kyung University's Department of Political Science, joining us in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hello, nice to see you.
We're also delighted to have Mason Richey, professor of international politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, joining us via Zoom. Welcome to the program.
Great, thanks for having me.
Professor Choi, let's start with you. So South Korea became the first country to host the Summit for Democracy outside the U.S. What significance does this hold?
Yes, as you told, this is the first Summit for Democracy that is held outside the United States. And I think this is important for several reasons. The first reason is this summit sends a strong message that the push for democracy is a worldwide effort, not just by the United States. It means that many countries are coming together to talk about how to make sure the people have freedom and human rights. And secondly, the choosing South Korea as the venue has a special significance for East Asia. And this region, that East Asia, has a mix of government types, from democracy to autocracy, and also some countries in the process of transition. But South Korea has experienced a successful democratization and also economic growth. So South Korea can serve as a shining example of a successful democratization in this diverse landscape of East Asia. And third, South Korea hosting the summit can strengthen our bonds with the United States and also other democratic allies. So, for example, the White House National Security Council announced that the South Korea is a democracy fighter that has stood with the United States on the front line. So I believe this is a good opportunity to strengthen ties based on shared value, which is so important for addressing regional security issues, including threat from North Korea and also rising power of China. So in simple terms, it is a good opportunity for South Korea to show leadership and bring countries together to talk about freedom and rights.
A shining example, really,
right.
Isn't it?
Yes, it
South
is.
Korea's near miracle transformation from the rubbles of the Korean War to becoming the world's 10th largest economy. It still continues to inspire many developing countries. And as you've pointed out, the vast economic development was possible through the country's own democratization. Now, Professor Richey, 2024 is the year of elections. More than 2 billion people across 50 countries are expected to head to the polls this year, with some pundits saying this year may be democracy's biggest test ever. Does this add to the significance of this year's Summit for Democracy?
Yeah, sure. I don't really think that the Summit for Democracy itself is going to be, able to bolster democracy for the 2024 election cycles that we're seeing, as you quite rightly pointed out, in so many countries. But I think it does mean that in some ways, perhaps more people and more nations as a whole are going to be aware of elections and democracy issues outside of their own country. And in that sense, perhaps the summit can plant a noticeable seed in future leaders for upholding democracy domestically, and of course, linking democracies together. So I think that's one way of looking at it. I think that, frankly, there's a little bit of, a sense in which the Summit for Democracy can be, easily criticized perhaps by some other states. When you look at the fact that it is led by the United States, and yet in 2020, the United States' President Trump at the time, refused to concede his election defeat and ensure the peaceful transition of power, which is one of the fundamental aspects of democracy, and in fact is currently running his entire campaign, or at least a significant part of his current campaign, to become president again, on the demonstrably false claims that he lost the election. So I think that the Summit for Democracy has some weaknesses in terms of its ability to influence democratization worldwide, and some of those weaknesses start at the top. Looking at things perhaps a little bit the other way around, the Summit for Democracy, what can it do for South Korea? It does build on Korea's history of functioning as what we call a meaningful convening power. The power to convene meetings, to bring in states for these types of summits is a part of soft power. And, South Korea does have a history of that, going back to the G20 in 2010, the Nuclear Security Summit in 2012, and some other meetings along the way as well, including the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial in 2021. So I think that this, does bolster South Korea's bona fides as a significant convening power. It helps, you show other countries that, you have lots of friends and partners. And, this fits in with the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's desire to be what it refers to as a global pivotal state and think beyond simply its foreign affairs and security and defense affairs on and around the Korean Peninsula.
Right. Having the power to convene like-minded countries itself is quite significant, isn't it? Now, Dr. Choi, ministerial level officials from some 30 countries took part on the first day, centering on safeguarding democracy from the risks of AI and digital technology. President Yoon called for global solidarity to address the issue. And today, the focus was the civil society and the youth. Could you walk us through the highlights of the summit so far?
Okay, so ministers from 30 countries attended this three-day Summit for Democracy. And there are many issues were discussed during the meeting, but there are two key areas of mutual concern. The first one is the use of some fake news and disinformation and its impact on democracy. And for example, there was a famous fake news during the past US presidential election. It was the Pope Francis announced that his support for Donald Trump. And this widely dispersed to American voters. And actually some people believe that. So this example shows how fake news and disinformation may negatively affect the democratic process of many countries. So tomorrow, the President Yoon Suk-yeol will chair the plenary session of the summit. And during this meeting, the title of the session is Technology, Election, and Fake News. And he will send a clear warning message that we need to protect the democratic process, especially electoral system, from the threat of fake news and disinformation. And the second key area is the use of technology and artificial intelligence to steal some information and sensitive technology from other countries. And especially the Tony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, said on Monday that authoritarian regimes are using technology to undermine democracy and human rights. And we must ensure that technology upholds democratic values and norms, such as human rights and freedom. And this comment should be understood in the context of the recent concern that China is perhaps using commercial spyware to steal intellectual property and technological secrets from U.S. companies. So these two key areas, the using commercial spyware and also fake news and disinformation, are the key main areas of this Summit for Democracy.
And Professor Richey, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken attended sessions held on the first day of the summit. And as our Professor Choi here mentioned, highlighting the need to protect democracy and human rights from authoritarian and oppressive regimes. He also briefly met with President Yoon and held talks with Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol. How do you assess the outcome of his visit?
At least with respect to the Summit for Democracy and that aspect of Secretary Blinken's visit, substantively, not much is going to come out of their meeting other than the U.S. and South Korea underlining that they are like-minded states with shared political values. And of course, that's important. That's something that the United States and South Korea can hold up as a model, to be emulated by other states. And as I mentioned earlier, convening power matters, and it's a sense in which South Korea can show that it has become powerful enough through its democratization, through its liberalization over time, to be able to hold this type of event. And so I think obviously that's important. Other things, of course, the Foreign Minister and Secretary of State Blinken talked about, as well as Blinken and President Yoon involved. The alliance, the sound fundamentals of the alliance. Obviously, criticism of North Korea, for its human rights abuses, for its lack of democracy, and for its violation of international law. And I think that's something that's important to think about too, is the sense in which states that have a solid rule of law, which is an important part of democracy, also tend to be states that are better at following international law, which feeds into peace and security in regions all over the world. I would say that Blinken's visit, obviously is good for Yoon in terms of showcasing the tight relationship that he has built between his administration and the Biden administration, the work that he has done to solidify the alliance with the United States, and that's obviously something that's important to him personally. It's important to his administration, but it's also something that's certainly, I would imagine, going to be useful and a meaningful plank in the PPP's platform as it heads into the general election for the National Assembly on April 10th. So certainly there's some campaign value to come out of that. I think I would say as the last thing, there is a little bit of criticism perhaps of South Korea as well. Just like I criticized the United States earlier, South Korea in the VDIM statistics is the only liberal democracy that has shown what they call the bell curve, which is to say a backsliding in democracy in recent years. So I think it's, at least I would hope, something that comes out of this Summit for Democracy is that even though South Korea is a consolidated democracy and has made a wonderful transition to becoming that consolidated democracy from an autocratic background, there is, of course, room for vigilance and room to make sure that it doesn't backslide in terms of its democratic credentials.
Blocking erosion of democracy is also an important dimension of the ongoing summit. Now, staying with you, Professor Richey, South Korea's hosting of the summit was sure to raise China's eyebrows as Taiwan's digital minister attended a session virtually on Monday. The Chinese foreign ministry was quick to react, urging Seoul to respect one China principle and to stop providing, quote unquote, a platform for Taiwanese independence forces. How do you see this?
So this is the least surprising thing that has happened at the summit. Obviously, anytime Taiwan is invited to participate in multilateral meetings, even as a sort of tangential participant, Beijing gets upset and lodges these types of complaints. Audrey Tang's participation wasn't even live. It was video and it was a pre-recorded message. This is just something that China does out of principle. It's also not the first time at the Summit for Democracy that Taiwan has been invited. In fact, it's been invited to each of the meetings that have taken place. until now, and China has had the same message every time. So I wouldn't read too much into it. This isn't going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of Chinese irritation with South Korea. This is, I won't say pro forma. They really are upset about it. But this is something to be expected, and I know that South Korea will have factored this in to their calculation in deciding to invite Taiwan as a participant in this in the first place.
Seoul's foreign ministry just this afternoon responded that the summit is being held to contribute to promotion of democracy and human rights and does not target any specific country. It also added that it respects China's one policy, and that stance remains unchanged. Like you said, the friction was expected, but it surely was palpable, which leads to our next question. Dr. Choi, how do you gauge the impact of the summit on future Seoul-Beijing relations? What would be a smart strategy for South Korea?
In the short term, it might upset China. So in the short term, China might respond with a diplomatic complaint or by putting some economic pressure on South Korea. But we must remember that China is a big deal for South Korea in its business and also for regional security. So what is a smart strategy for South Korea? I can suggest maybe two policies. The first, South Korea should talk with China before and after the meeting to explain its position and intention in hosting this kind of event. So if South Korea point out that the meeting is really about democracy and human rights and not being about against China, it could make China think more positively. And secondly, so South Korea could emphasize the importance of multilateralism and international cooperation in addressing the common challenges. So, for example, South Korea can position itself as a mediator for dialogue and regional security and economic issues. So it can reduce the negative impact of the Summit for Democracy and possibly other meetings on its relation with China. So in simple terms, the summit could make things difficult between South Korea and China. But however, a thoughtful strategy that engages China and emphasizes the importance of multilateral cooperation can help manage potential conflict between the two countries.
Well, striking the delicate balance between the U.S. and China has always been South Korea's key diplomatic challenge, hasn't it? Now, back to you, Dr. Richey. The summit is taking place amid heightened tensions surrounding the Korean peninsula. North Korea resumed its missile provocation despite Blinken's visit, while Russian President Putin, just before the country's presidential election, renewed his threat against the West that Russia is ready for a nuclear war. He also made claims that are widely interpreted as a recognition of the North as a de facto nuclear state. Now, against such a backdrop, what kind of message is expected toward Moscow, Pyongyang, and also toward Beijing during tomorrow's main session?
Sure. So, I'll start by saying, as you mentioned earlier, the Summit for Democracy participants in South Korea included especially, have been at pains to say that this is a summit for democracy. It's not a summit against Beijing or against Moscow or against Pyongyang. If that's how those countries are going to read this, one can't prevent them from doing so. I think that the main response from the summit, is the main message, let's say, from the Summit for Democracy, let's say collectively and of course diplomatically, is going to be that human rights must be respected, not because a state deigns to do so, but because human rights are universal rights. And human rights are the rights of all people everywhere. And this isn't something that is only suitable for democracies, but it is in fact something that is intended for and a right of all human beings by virtue of being humans. Secondly, I think the message is going to be that democracies are going to defend themselves against disinformation and hybrid warfare that undermine their states and their political systems. Again, there may not be a particular recipient of this, but obviously the state that tends to engage in this behavior most is Russia, but obviously other states, including North Korea and China, engage in this type of disinformation as well. So I think that one of the messages really going out to the sort of problematic triangle of Beijing, Pyongyang, and Moscow is that democracies are going to defend themselves, that they're going to try to find a way to work with each other and domestically within their own states to shore up the defenses that they have, or at least that they're going to try. And this is becoming more challenging, which is part of the reason why you are having this summit, which aims at international cooperation in the first place. And we know from the first day, for instance, with the discussion on artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence is going to provide risks and opportunities for democracies to remain solid, but also, unfortunately, to be subject to certain vulnerabilities. And so part of the point of these types of messages is that democratic states are going to share ideas and best practices for how they can strategically approach these questions. And one would hope, at least, that part of the message is going to be that Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang should get the message that they're not simply going to be able to infiltrate the democratic systems of the states represented at the summit.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for tonight, but the summit continues. The main session will be held tomorrow, parts of which will be presided over by President Yoon. Thank you so much, Professor Richey and Professor Choi, for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in at same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.